Good morning. I'm Roxana Markoch, the David Deckman Senior Curator and Acting Chief Curator of Photography at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I'm here for this interview at Dashwood Books, one of my favorite places in NoHo, which is also my neighborhood. This is a place that I often come to. It is a place for bibliophiles. And I'm here to discuss the most recent publication that I have edited, this wonderful photographic book, which is also an artist book, all wrapped in one, Wolfgang Tillmans' To Look Without Fear, which is a major volume that includes some 320 pages and 400 photographs, and which was made in conjunction with a major survey of the artist's work at the Museum of Modern Art, which is currently on view through January 1st. That exhibition will also travel subsequently at the Art Gallery of Ontario in Canada and at also SF MoMA. So this publication and the exhibition were made over a long period of time. The story goes, in fact, that the first time that I've ever seen Wolfgang work, and it's kind of interesting if you think back and try to remember when have you first seen an artist's work. Well, the first time that I saw Wolfgang's work was in 1994 at Andrea Rosen Gallery, a gallery which had opened a few years before here in Soho, on Prince Street, in the city. And I was so struck by the way that the works were installed. The works were not framed, they were not matted, they were not glazed. There was an absolute immediacy of the photographic work, the way that it was taped to the wall, and also by the subject matter. The subject was a lot about the youth culture of the early 1990s, that I promised myself that I would follow this artist's work. And so I did. In 1996, his work was first presented at the Museum of Modern Art in New Photography. This is a series, an iteration of a series that has been happening at the museum for almost the past 40 years, and where we are presenting very significant emerging artists. And at the same time, then I was not really working at MoMA yet. I was a graduate student in art history, but I was working on a book which was titled New Art. And I decided to include Wolfgang's work in it. That was a book about 100 artists that were working globally and whose work was extremely promising. And so then in 2006, I saw Wolfgang's work again, this time at MoMA PS1. It was an exhibition titled Freedom from the Known, which presented his abstract work. And that was also striking because Wolfgang always experiments with new photographic formats and new photographic subject matters. And so since then, in 2014, I had the really good fortune of just running into Wolfgang Tillmans at Manifesta 10 in St. Petersburg in Russia. And on the occasion of that biennial where Wolfgang was participating. And it was on that occasion that we first began discussing the prospect of a survey show at the Museum of Modern Art. And so over the past 8 years, we worked on this exhibition, which, as I said, it's a major one. And it's a survey show that covers the full breadth and depth of his career from the early 1980s to the present, just as the book does. This is, in fact, the most comprehensive book of the artist to date. And we, of course, had challenges along the way because the exhibition was supposed, and the publication was meant to open a year and a half ago. but the COVID-19 pandemic precluded that, and we had to postpone both the publication and the exhibition. But what I can say with great certainty is that over the difficult period of the crisis of this pandemic, Wolfgang Tillmans never stopped impressing me as a true visionary creator, but also as an artist citizen whose true love for photography also and formal innovation melds with his ethics of care for the others. And he has been a strong promoter, in fact, of indie bookstores, of different music places that were threatened with disappearance during the pandemic. And I love this social activist aspect also, which is part of his practice. So this book is titled To Look Without Fear. And the title itself, which I also have on my hoodie here, comes from an interview that Tillmans had in 2008 with the art critic and musician Dominic Eichler, which was published in Frieze magazine, and which we then republished in the Wolfgang Tillmans Reader, which is another publication that accompanies the exhibition and the exhibition catalog. And in that interview, Tillmans talks about the power of vision, or about the eye as being a visual tool that can be enfranchised, that can be fearless in the way that it looks at the world and takes charge of it, and about also how to look at the world without biases. And I always like to start, when I do the research, with interviews by the artist, and that's how I came along. I'm interested in the voice of the artist, how an artist thinks, and that's how I came about that interview, and that became also the title of our book. So what I wanted with this publication is to truly have a diversity of voices and to bring forth aspects that were not previously known. So there are here four major overarching essays, and then 10 focused essays on specific topics pertaining to his practice. And also we have an intellectual chronology of his work. And finally, there is also a wonderful new piece written by the artist himself on his methodology. And there are various aspects of his work that are perhaps lesser known to audiences. The fact that his early works from the 1980s, when he starts making not just photographs, but also he works with photocopies, Xerox copies. He works with video works, and he works with music. So that tells you that Tillmans actually is a polymath. And this wonderful map here at the beginning of my essay, which is titled The Wandering Image, that comes also from one of Wolfgang's writings, the wandering image, meaning the iterative image, the one that travels, which tells you something about his own investigation, about what images do, how do they function in society, how do they proliferate technologically and socially. This kind of wonderful map tells you something about the fact that this is an artist who not only works across all photographic genres, and you will see in this book images that are as diverse as intimate nudes, images of ecstatic club life. You will have wonderful still lifes and also abstractions. You will have images of people portraiture, self-portraiture, and of course, various images of social documents. And in addition to that, the fact that this is an artist who is interested in music and in social activism, in writing, and in astronomy makes truly this, book one of the most diverse to date. So I would like to show you one of his earliest installations. This was done at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and you will see the fact that since his very first exhibition, the first one in a gallery, was at Buchholz and Buchholz in Cologne, he has a way of mapping the entire wall with photographs that are either directly scotch taped to the wall, or the large inkjet prints are clipped with clips, and then the pin goes into the binding clip into the wall, never touching the photographic paper, for which he has enormous respect. And some of them are framed. And in addition to that, there are precisely excised images from his from magazine pages, because in the early 1990s, Hilmers begins to collaborate with a number of magazines, including with ID, the British kind of anti-fashion magazine ID, and he collaborates on a monthly basis with them, creating various stories. And it's very interesting because this mixing of different types of photographs and genres speaks about his democratic and anti-hierarchical installation, where if one thing's matter, everything matters. I'm just trying to find, of course, there are so many images, but to show you one wonderful installation that he does, I found one image at least. So for the 1992 issue of ID magazine, which is titled The Sexuality Issue, he does an editorial, which is many spreads, that is titled Like Brother, Like Sister. And one of the images that is published in that editorial is of Lutz and Alex in the trees that you see here. Lutz and Alex are the artist's oldest friends. They met in high school and they continue to be friends to this day. They both came to his opening at MoMA from Germany and from France, respectively. And it's interesting because one of the critics writes about this very controversial, like brother, like sister, that it burned a hole into the minds of everyone who saw it. And the reason is that people were misconceiving this image as being somewhat incestual. Now, Alex and Lutz are neither siblings nor lovers. They are best friends. They've always been best friends. And but there is something about the this kind of a new Adam and Eve picture in which both of them wear each other's raincoats. Both of them are nude, and they both gaze directly at the viewer. That makes it a new kind of picture making. And there is a wonderful way in which this kind of gender fluidity in their androgynous looks, but also gender equality is being preserved. With this kind of work, Wolfgang begins to collaborate with others, with his friends. And one aspect that is very important to make is that he is not an artist who makes snapshots. Sometimes that is being misunderstood about his work, because many of his pieces are staged or they are very carefully structured. But what I should mention is that among these 4 overarching essays, I'm writing about the way that his true practice is not just photography, but also the activation of photographs in actual space, like in the exhibition space, as well as in publications on the covers of albums, of musical albums, and in terms of social activism. And there are also an overarching essay on one monographic series that is written by Sophie Hackett on the soldiers, which is a very important body of work that he does at the end of the 90s, in 1999, and which speaks about a certain utopic vision that we had about the end of the Cold War. And there is also a wonderful essay written by Clément Cheroux on the relationship between photography and sculpture in his practice, and Keller Esterling on architecture and the social space for his photographs. And then the focused essays are on specific bodies of works, including, for instance, portraiture. And I just want to show a couple of wonderful portraits here of 2 women, musicians, and I love the presentation or the elegance of the 2 of them. This is Smoking Joe, who is one of the greatest DJs of all time. Her real name is Joan Joseph, actually, but she adopted her stage name as Smoking Joe from the nickname of the boxer Smoking Joe Frazier, in order to create this gender fluidity at a time when women had a difficult time in actually booking any DJ jobs. And what I love about this photograph is her presence. And this is a picture that was taken in London against the Thames River in February. So obviously it's freezing cold, yet here she is in just gorgeous sequin top, so self-assured, so good in her own skin. And yet if you look very closely, you'll notice that she has goosebumps on her arm, and there is a little tear in her eye. And Wolfgang said that he's never really taking pictures, but just capturing what is already there in the sitter. And I want to show you another portrait, which is in fact a self-portrait. This is called Lacanau Self, and it is what Wolfgang calls his picture number 1. Because it is a picture with which, as a teenager, he kind of came out as a photographer. It was taken in the southwest France on the beach of Lacanau. And I don't know if you can see what this is, or how this picture was done, but it was taken with a camera up-down, looking from up down. So what you see here is his white pinkish t-shirt, his shorts, and then his foreshortened knee and leg walking on the beach. So this is at once a corporeal study, a self-portrait, and an abstract picture all at once. And Oluremi Onabanjo writes about his portraiture and self-portraiture in this wonderful also essay. And here is Wolfgang, a picture of him in the bathtub, probably one of his very first, or one of the very first selfies before selfies ever existed. This is a work from the early 90s, where he's taking the photograph by holding his camera while the shower also the water splashes his face and he doesn't have full control of the image that he is taking. And the wonderful Chloe Sevigny, a photograph of her with an electric guitar. But I also love this work, which he took in 2014 in Union Square during the protests for Black Lives Matter. And this is also a portrait, and you just see one hand, this black hand, that is being raised up. And it's such a beautiful gesture. It's a gesture of hello, it's a gesture of resistance, it's a gesture of protest. It is also a gesture of hands up, don't shoot, all in one. And then there are other photographs of his closest friends. This is Johann Klein, who the artist meets in 1995 in New York when he moves to New York for 2 years. And Johann Klein was a wonderful artist. He was a painter, a conceptual artist, and also he was part of the collective group Material. But their relationship was short-lived because in 1997, Johann finds out that he has AIDS and he will die soon after this picture was taken of pneumonia-related complications. But here he is in his bathtub, and we already looked at one of Tillmans's photographs in the shower. So he often photographs, in the shower or in the bathtub, because this is such a space, an intimate space, a space of vulnerability and intimacy. And so this can be also considered sort of a memento mori. And then this is another picture of one of his closest friends, another artist, but who is just a scene from everyday life. He's pulling out a splinter from his foot. And yet this is such an art historical trope if you think of the Spinario, the famous sculpture of Greco-Roman sculpture from antiquity, where you similarly see a youth doing that. Only this is just a mundane everyday life, occurrence. And then I mentioned already, Wolfgang's extraordinary abstractions. And in the late 90s and early 2000s, he begins to make cameraless photographs. These are unique photographs that are produced by the artist in the darkroom. And they are of different types. For instance, these are called silvers, and they are done by placing the photographic paper through a dirty developer, so that what you have and you see in the images are just traces of salts, of various chemicals, errors, basically, that provide this beautiful metallurgical feel to the surface of the photograph that comes closer to his Xerox copies that he starts to make very early in his life. I mentioned in the 1980s. And all of these are unique photographs, or the lighters in which he bends the photographic paper and then he exposes it to light in the dark room. Underscoring the fact that photography is not a two-dimensional medium, that the photographic paper has a certain weight, has a certain, bent to it, that it performs in certain ways. And of course, there are just wonderful, abstractions like his, if I can find one, let's see, abstractions which are called Freischwimmers. Freischwimmers translate as free swimmer. in which, like this, should be a few more in the book, but anyway, in which he again, cameraless photographs in which he uses different light sources, such as, for instance, lasers or flashlights or, cigarette lighters, to create, this kind of very sometimes orgiastic, performative lines through the photograph. Making it an abstract picture, but at the same time a very political work, because so an abstraction can be also political, because it's the performance of his own body, and the threads in this picture look like hairs or like fibers in the body. And of course, Wolfgang is also an artist who has lived with being HIV positive all his life. And then there are abstractions just like this. This is a picture which, and you can see it also here in an installation shot, which was taken in St. Petersburg in 2014 when I ran into him on the occasion of Manifesta 10. It is a photograph that he took from his TV, from the screen of his television in his hotel room. And this piece is called End of Broadcast. So what it shows is actually that kind of abstract noise, the noise that you see on the screen of the TV and all type of television screens at the end of a broadcast. So it is a work that is an abstraction, but at the same time speaks about censorship. And this is 2014, which is the beginning of the Russo-Ukrainian war in Crimea, when Putin obviously starts to forbid free press. So it's also an image of censorship. And so having spoken about his portraiture and his abstractions and his political work a little bit, I should also mention one other aspect, and that is the cover that you see here. The image on the cover is titled Ice Storm, and this is what Tillmans calls an intervention picture, meaning that the photograph was taken, in this case, of an ice storm, which is the title of the work, at Sabbath Day in Maine, Sabbath Day Lake in Maine, at the time when he was in very early 2000, late 90s, early 2000, part of a workshop and residency in the Shakers community. And what he photographed here was a landscape that you can see, a landscape of an ice storm, a landscape that had been destroyed by an ice storm the winter prior. The landscape itself was never shown, but then he took the negative and manipulated it during the development phase in the darkroom by also using these lights sources directly on the negative and creating these very fiery red acidic shapes which are abstract. So this is an image also that is an ecological image of sorts to me, because it involves both an ice storm and a fire. And one last aspect that maybe I would like to mention is that the artist also loves to collaborate with, well, obviously he collaborates quite often with musicians. He has taken over 200 pictures of musicians, including of most recently of Kate Tempest or of Frank Ocean. But also, not to forget, I'm going to keep this here, just because I'd like to also mention another aspect which I forgot about. But yes, regarding to his wonderful music that he starts making in the 1980s with his band Fragile, he begins to produce and to record music. And in the exhibition and in the catalog too, we have an image that is titled Moon in Earthlight. And I want to mention this because Moon in Earthlight is a sound, an image-driven sound installation, which shows his first full album by the same title, Moon in Earthlight. And the title comes from a phenomenon in astronomy where the moon gets its full round shape by light that it is reflected not from the sun, but from the earth. And so all the images in that installation, which is a 1 hour long sound and image installation, is also accompanied by one of his songs. And I mentioned that because it's not only his interest in sound, but the relationship and the layering between music and photography is very important in his work. And Wolfgang always starts he often starts his sounds by recording his own voice, like voice memos on his iPhone, or also field recordings outside. And for that, he has the terminology of audio photography. And Wolfgang first started by taking his very first photograph was when he was 10 years old. And as you can see here, these are all astro photographic images. And he took that first, photograph as a child by placing his father's camera on top of a telescope, of the lens of a telescope, and taking images that were astral images, cosmic images. And that's very important because astronomy is one of the oldest and probably most poetic forms of observation. And at the core of Wolfgang's photographic practice is a love of observation of the world. And he considers himself to be an amplifier of both ideas, observations, and also social and ethical concerns. So I think that's all for today. It's been such a great pleasure talking to you all. And please just share with your friends the catalog. And if you are in New York, come visit the exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art.